जिस एक्ट के तहत आप बंद रख रहे हो।
Good evening and welcome. You're watching Left, Right and Centre with me, Sanket Upadhyay. It happened in 1989 and 1990. Films were made about it. A lot was spoken about. Politics happened. But in 2022, the same thing is happening. No film has been made, obviously, because it has happened only today. And the chatter, particularly around those who are responsible to protect, is also very limited and muted. Why, one asks? If you cared so much for the Kashmiri Pandits and their suffering in the 1990s, why not care for them now? What about their Exodus 2.0? The big question that we are asking on the show, as many Kashmiri Pandits are packing their bag and moving out of Kashmir to either Jammu or other places by road, some of them were physically stopped. That no, you can't do that, go back. The big question is, has the centre left the Kashmiris to fend for themselves? Because there are targeted killings that are happening. Every day we get to hear of some incident or the other. Why no intervention now? Where is that soothing of the frayed nerves right now? This is the big question that we are asking right here on this show. We'll get you all the latest. We've in fact even spoken to the husband of Rajan Bala, who was killed by militants. In fact, only today another incident has happened. In New Delhi, we can see some movement that is taking place where Amit Shah met with the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. And tomorrow is a very crucial meeting, very crucial meeting between the LG, Manoj Sinha of Jammu and Kashmir, and the Home Minister. Who will the administration blame now? Terrorists? Yes, of course. It is a terror act. There is a shift in strategy. But then there are very many pertinent questions. Who was responsible for ensuring safety and security of the Kashmiris for the past many years? Who was? Directly, the state has directly been in the control of the centre for a very long time now. So who do you blame? You can blame the terrorists, but then there will be other pertinent questions. If there are terrorists who are killing not using AK-47s, or there is no big terror attack, but targeted killings are happening with small weapons, then the larger question is, where was the intelligence? Has the administration not failed on the front of intelligence? Secondly, these small arms that are being carried by these terrorists, how did they enter Jammu and Kashmir? Who is governing the state right now? Who is responsible for the safety and security? Tall claims were made that we have brought crime down, we have brought terrorist activities down, intelligence is very good, security apparatus working at its peak. Then how did this happen? How did the guns land in Jammu and Kashmir? And then who takes the blame if Pandits now decide that they don't want to stay in Jammu and Kashmir and plan an Exodus 2.0? Who will the government blame? Let's kickstart this conversation. We have Imran Nabi, spokesperson of the National Conference. We have Brigadier Anil Gupta. He's the leader of the BJP in Jammu and Kashmir. Kuldeep Khoda is a former DGP of Jammu and Kashmir. Lalit Ambardar, a Kashmiri Pandit. Thank you very much. In just a short moment, we'll have Syed Sohail Bukhari, spokesperson of the PDP also. I want to begin by asking a question of Mr. Kuldeep Khoda. Mr. Khoda, do you feel that what is happening right now in Kashmir, which many Kashmiri Pandits are calling a 1990 deja vu, is unusual from a security point of view?
Well, if you ask me very frankly, it's it was waiting to happen because the security situation had not been brought totally under control when the employment package was worked out for Kashmiri Pandits to go back to Kashmir. It was only because the terrorists were not interested in harming them since the time they started moving back for the PM's package employment, that they were safe. Otherwise, the way they were employed and the way they were scattered all over in different offices, it was not only the office or place of residence, their movement, their requirement, local requirements, going to market and other places, which kept them always vulnerable to any terrorist attack. Now that there has been a shift in the terrorist strategy into targeting the soft targets, that this thing has happened. It was only a question of when the terrorist or Pakistan decides to target them. On the overall security front, the security forces and the police have done a terrific job. The elimination of terrorists has been on a large scale. The infiltration has also been controlled to a large extent. But the point is that the use of drones has sent in lots of small arms, and the use of drones has been quite frequent now across the borders, particularly in Jammu region. So this is a new challenge for the security forces. And as far as asking the Kashmiri Pandits to stay on with the employment, then of course we have to have a very sound, secure system for them to stay on. The way they are presently deployed and working, it was never safe earlier also. It is not safe now. As I mentioned, that it was only a thing which was waiting to happen.
And that's a very important point that you make. But Mr. Khoda, from an intelligence gathering point of view, for a government which has been there in force, the security apparatus there, I think in terms of intelligence gathering, I can't think of any other place which will have more or those strobe lights are more on any other part of this country than Jammu and Kashmir. And yet this happened. You say they came in from drones, but was this fact not known? And if it was known, what was done?
Absolutely, this is a very important point. We had a system, if you look at the statistics from 2001 onwards, when the terrorism was, taken on a global level, the number of incidents has been coming down consistently from 2001 onwards to 2012. And after 2012, the number of incidents, the number of security force killed, and the number of civilians killed has gone up gradually. It's not that it has remained consistent on downtrend. You have to believe the statistics which are there on the websites, which are gathered. If you look at the figures, the number of the security forces losses was minimum at 18 in 2012. After that, they have gradually gone up. The number of civilians killed was just 14 in 2012, and then they have gradually gone up. And the security situation has always been a point of challenge for the security forces. But as far as intelligence is concerned, we had a system which was being followed. It's not a question of only handling the terrorists with firearms on the security forces or who are there in the combat. It's the overground workers, their helpers also who are to be targeted. We had a situation where we carried out a census in all the villages in Kashmir Valley. And in the census, it was an unofficial census. It was not the census through the census agency of Government of India. It was at the Thana level where the persons who had inclination to helping the terrorists, to providing them shelter, to provide them infrastructural support and other facilities, they were identified. And the police was always they were under the radar of police always. And lots of arrests were made during that time on them, which led to sharp decrease in incidents. And simultaneously, we had a system of having core group meetings. That was in addition to the unified command meetings. The core group meetings would happen almost every week, 10 days. That was where all on-ground actions, whether it was against the terrorists or their supporters or the overground workers or their helpers or the people in general or the civic action programs which were to get people on board towards the mainstream. All these action plans were discussed threadbare and the actions were taken. And this core group meeting was of the army, the police, the paramilitaries and all intelligence agencies. I am not sure whether those core group meetings are happening at that regular interval, where minute details on everyday basis are discussed between all security force agencies.
I think this is such an important point, and that is what on-ground perspective is all about. And thank you so much, Kuldeep Khoda, for putting this in perspective. Something and some systems that were in place are those systems already in place? Because imagine that minute intelligence gathering could have helped us. The inflow of these firearms would not have taken place. I want to come to you, Brigadier Anil Gupta. You know, the point is, as a consequence of whatever has happened, grandstanding, grand positioning, political positioning is one thing. The consequence on the ground is that the Kashmiri Pandits and many others feel unsafe, insecure, and they want to leave. Who do you blame for this? You are the government. You are in the administration.
Sanket, give me 2-3 minutes to make few points. Firstly, it's not time for grandstanding. It's time for hard facts and catching the bull by the horn. The fact is that the strategy so far has failed. So we need to review it. That is point number one. Secondly, who's responsible? Let's get to the cause of it. What has happened? You see, the deeply polluted ecosystem of Kashmir has now been infiltrated by the Gupkaris. Earlier, they used terrorists for winning elections. Now they are using them to prove that abrogation of 370 was a failure. And that is why, if you see the targets of this targeted killing, they are those who could have proved as symbols of success of abrogation of 370. Kashmiri Pandits, the Hindus who are there with domicile certificates, the policemen so that the intelligence dries up, singer so that the idea of opening the cinema was shelved. All these are the people, all these activities are aimed to prove that abrogation of 370 has been failed. And I would say that Gupkaris are hands in glove with as far as these acts are concerned. Now coming on to, you see, I give you an example. Ever since Wahid Para has come out, the Delhi killings are taking place. Is it coincidence? The intelligence agencies need to look into it. I fully agree with Kuldeep Khudaji that the ground level intelligence has totally failed. I would say JKP has failed as far as ground level intelligence is concerned. It's their responsibility. Eyes and ears to the ground is responsible of the local police. The SSP Kulgam is failed in his duties. He is not able to gather intelligence in his area.
Now, Brigadier Gupta, it is very easy to blame a police force. I'm just applying the rules that you would apply to any other state where an incident like this happens.
My dear friend, police force is responsible for ground level intelligence. Ask Mr. Khuda, he will agree with me. They are the ones who provide ground level intelligence. And these killings can only be stopped if the ground level intelligence is adequate. The terrorists have acted very smartly.
I don't know why. I feel, Brigadier Gupta, that
policemen,
a better response will be to not look for scapegoats or villains
scapegoats.
here or there.
By the horn.
One SP here, one SP there, one inspector here, there. The point is, this is more institutional. It's not just happening in Kulgam, no. It's happening in other parts also. Everybody is
majorly happening in Kulgam. Listen to me, Sanket. What I'm trying to say is, try to get into the meat of the issue. You are trying to just carry, pinpricks. The main meat of the issue is that the ground level intelligence of the police in Jammu and Kashmir, in Kashmir properly, has failed. There's no doubt about it. And that is because the policemen were targeted. The terrorists have succeeded in drying up the intelligence by targeting policemen. Next point.
Then there'll be an obvious question, what was done about it if this was known?
This is known. This is what I'm saying. Our strategy has failed, so needs a revamp.
So you admit that your strategy failed. I think that's very honest of you to say that the strategy of the government,
it's time to relook at strategy,
over the past 3 years has not worked, has failed, in the words of Brigadier Anil Gupta, and there is a desperate need for a relook.
Yes, definitely.
Lalit Ambardar is a Kashmiri Pandit who's also with us. Mr. Ambardar, I want to come to you now. You see Kashmiri Pandits looking for a palayan or an exodus, which is being now called Deja Vu 1990 and Exodus 2.0. A lot is being said that this is a very knee-jerk reaction. How would you respond to this?
Knee-jerk reaction on whose part?
The Pandits. That they must give the government more time, that they must stand shoulder to shoulder with the government as the government tries to recalibrate its response.
Right.
I know it's easier said than done. That's why I'm asking you this question.
First of all, it's not Exodus 2.0. Exodus is what happened in 1990 when Kashmiri Hindus had to flee their herds and homes and take refuge 300 kilometers south of Srinagar in Jammu. And what were the conditions there? Yahan kya chalega Nizam-e-Mustafa, Kashmir mein rehna hoga, Allah Akbar kehna hoga, and the tools of genocide were rape, gang rape, murder and mass murder. So now, even now, these Kashmiri Hindus who are falling prey to the jihad, their dead bodies go to Jammu. They are cremated in Jammu, not in Srinagar. So it's not an exodus. They are only seeking refuge where their parents and their families are. So this is first thing. It's not an exodus at all.
Sure.
Right. Number two, why are these Kashmiri Hindus in Srinagar in the first instance? Remember, I heard they were talking about a kind of a lull and downfall in terror activities, that period of Vajpayee ji and then Shri Manmohan Singh ji. If you recall, that time we were having negotiations with Pakistan. Musharraf, thank God that Agra summit failed. What was left over was carried forward by Mr. Manmohan Singh. India was compromising on Kashmir. It would have been a huge compromise, because I have attended seminars, not as an invited guest. I have subverted many such seminars. There, the issue was not about whether India should compromise on Kashmir. It was taken for granted that India must compromise in Kashmir. The issue was about how much India could be goaded to bend. It was then, if you recall, Chidambaram, the Home Minister of India, made a very startling announcement in the Parliament of India that Kashmir is a unique problem. It deserves a unique solution. These guys were preparing the nation for that Himalayan blunder. And that is time these Kashmiri Hindu boys and girls, deprived section within the refugees, the survivors of genocide living in refugee camps in Jammu, their deprivation was exploited, economic condition was exploited, and they were sent back to Srinagar in Kashmir, to the very towns and villages of Kashmir from where their families were hounded out.
So you were saying that this was not really a rehabilitation, but an attempt to show that all is normal. But the point is, there have been successive governments since then. There have been successive governments since then. They could have made a difference, but they did not. So much so that now the Kashmiri Pandits want to come back to Jammu. I want to quickly bring in Imran Nabi as well as Sohail Bukhari. I'll come back. I have limited time. Mr. Ahmadar, I'll come back to you. I have limited time.
That period was a strategic lull. Jihad is now a hybrid war.
Okay.
They are creating the same impact.
Imran Nabi, if I heard Brigadier Gupta correctly, he says that it is because of the Gupkaris. Brigadier Gupta can correct me also. The Gupkar gang, as it is called, that this is happening. How would you respond? And obviously, this is a reference to the PDP and the NC.
You know, this is a common practice of BJP. Wherever they find themselves in a tight spot, they just shift the goalpost. That is what Mr. Gupta is doing right now. He's just shifting the goalpost rather than accepting the failure that this administration and this government has had. They are blaming people who are out of power for the last 8 years. Who is running the show in Jammu and Kashmir? It is BJP for the last 8. First, they were with PDP for like four years. Then they're completely controlling J&K. It is with them. It is for the last 8 years with BJP. What are they doing? What have they done? You know, the problem with BJP is that they are not ready to accept the mistakes that they are committing. Their only defense is that they will blame the opposition. Arey yaar, kabhi to sometimes own the responsibility. I am very happy that at the end of his rhetoric, what he was telling you, he accepted that there is a failure. I will go a step ahead. I would say that it was not a law and order failure. It is a complete policy paralysis. There has been complete failure on their part. What they said when they abrogated Article 370, and now he's trying to relate it to Article 370. These are very serious charges that he has made.
Okay.
You know,
I'll get his response also, but very quickly, Sohail Bukhari. Sayyid Sohail Bukhari, your views, what do you think about this situation?
Well, thankfully, Brigadier stopped at Gupkaris. He did not go all the way to Mr. Nehru to, blame him for what is happening today. Thank God for that. Having said that, what we are witnessing right now, if, Sanket, only imagine if somebody else were at the helm of affairs, if it was some regional party governing Jammu and Kashmir, or for that matter, any other state, these very people would have gone all hogged and they would have been linked. held responsible, asked to tender their resignation. But because it is Mr. Amit Shah who is in direct control of the situation in Jammu and Kashmir for last so many years, and because of the narrative of lies that they weaved around 370, 35A being the root cause of all the problems, and now that they, it has all boomeranged on them, they really do not have a place to escape. The fact remains, the situation is far worse than what it had been for years altogether. These targeted killings, the intelligence failures, Mr. Kuldeep Khoda is on the panel, he would tell you, and I would say that rather he would, not agree with Brigadier Gupta when he says that because policemen are being targeted, therefore the intelligence has dried up. Mr. Khoda would tell you that it is very imperative to have the society, civil society, public at large to be on your side if you are dealing with a situation like the one we are dealing out here. But what these guys have done, they have demonized them, they have criminalized them, they have pushed them to the wall, they have snatched their democratic rights, and then they expect things to go better.
Okay,
One very
Brigadier,
important aspect.
no, but my point is, you're saying just because an administration has demonized. See, a lot of, and one thing that has to be mentioned here, it is not just Kashmiri Pandits or Hindus who are not Kashmiris who are being killed. Muslims have been killed too.
Yes, Sanket, I want to come on that.
One last point. I want to make one last point. That no number of security personnel with their guns can secure the lives of the minorities in Kashmir unless this sense of security
Brigadier
stems out
Gupta,
from
your
the
response, please.
collective
Sayed
ecosystem and majority
Bukhari
society in
says
Kashmir.
that this is
and
because
when
of
you
a
push them to
policy
wall,
of
this is not going to work.
Isolating people, that intelligence has dried up.
Can I also make a point, Sanket?
First Brigadier Gupta and then I'll come to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
2-3 points. Firstly, intelligence was flowing in beautifully about a month back. The same people, same public, same civil society. But beautiful intelligence, pinpoint, targeted attacks took place. Secondly, who used the terrorists for election purposes? Same people are now using terrorists to prove 370 has been a failure. He said in no uncertain terms that it is the failure of 370. That is what they want to prove. And that is why they are using terrorists for that. Then why wasn't there a response from or anything, reaction from the civil society or the civilians in Kashmir when 370 was revoked? Civilians didn't react. They accepted it. So Gupkaris thought that their policy has, no, they may succeed. So they started using terrorists. That's the last resort with them. And that is what is happening. I just made a point. Ever since Bahid Para has come out, there are daily killings. Is a coincidence? Please tell me that.
Sayyid Bukhari, your response quickly. And then Mr.
Take one point more. See, he talks of winning hearts and minds. Now, where is question of winning hearts and minds? It is very, very subjective. The hearts and minds are required to be one of the minorities. You heard the Rajni Bala's husband that they had been going to CO Kulgam repeatedly saying that we are threatened, please post a safer place. And he told them that I'll send you a farther place. There's no threat to you. That means there's no empathy. The hearts and mind needs to be one of the minorities. But this is the attitude of the majority there. This is the attitude of the Muslim officers in Kashmir. And that is why the minorities there are suffering. Can their killing take place inside a bank
Bukhari, quickly.
If the locals are not involved?
Sanket, listen, it really doesn't require anybody to be a rocket scientist to figure out that BJP and Amit Shah and Narendra Modi have failed miserably. They have really not been able to prove that, whatever they had said about Jammu and Kashmir, the situation here, 370, 35A, was actually fact. It has turned out that it was a sheer lie. And another very important aspect, and I'll end with that. They have also been trying to peddle that, minority community is being targeted and majority community is not doing anything. Because if the truth comes out and people get to know that people have been very vocally condemning what has happened to them. And I'm not talking about hearsay stories. I'm talking about myself trying to lead a protest of hundreds of our own workers in Srinagar, which police foiled, and they did not let us go out because that does not suit their narrative of organization.
Last comment, please.
They have
yes, sir.
Mr. Ambadar, your final comment, please.
Sir, please. There is no, I don't see anybody acknowledging what India has on hand in Kashmir is Kashmir Jihad. Don't forget, Kashmir is the Himalayan end of Islamist arc that arises from Middle East, traverses Afghanistan, Pakistan. Their eyes are on Delhi. Kashmir is a mere passage for them. And Kashmiri Hindu genocide remains unacknowledged till date. How do you expect them to be rehabilitated when their rapists, murders and mass murderers are roaming free? And secondly, these jihadis do not fall from heaven. They come from neighborhood, kill at will, and go back coolly back to the neighborhood. Where is the civil society? And for this PDP and National Conference's member of Lok Sabha today, Akbar Lone, he ranted in the live legislature assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan Zindabad. When reporters asked him outside, why did you do it? He said, "Main Musalman hu, bawuk ho gaya. I'm a Muslim. I became sentimental about Pakistan."
Okay. So again,
Number two, PDP is official document. Why do you have to shift the blame all the time? We're not here to listen to your nonsense all the time.
my point is, while this is an individual who may have said this, the larger question is, and I think Brigadier Anil Gupta said it very, very clearly, that the administration in Jammu and Kashmir may have failed in its duty, and there is a very, very strong need right now to go for a hard reset, a hard rethink on a Jammu and Kashmir strategy. Thank you very much for joining us. Some comments on the Coup app. Mr. Tushar says, what government has learned from Kashmir File movie even after promoting it big time? Others says Kashmiri Pandits are being targeted again and again. That's a wrap in this edition of Left, Right and Centre.